In this video, I'm going to show you how to use the Context API in functional components. As you will see at the end of this video, using the Context API in functional components is a lot easier than class components. You're going to love it. So we're going to extend this hierarchy and introduce a new child component called movie row. So the movie list component can contain one or more movie row components. So in the context folder, let's add a new file called movie row.jsx. Now to generate a functional component, we type RSF, that is short for React Stateless Function. Tab, there you go. Now to use the user context inside this component, first we need to import it on the top. So user context from user context. Now we have a special hook called use context. So we need to pull that out from the React module, use context. This hook only works with functional components. Now, in this function, first we're going to call use context and pass the user context as an argument. This returns our user context object, which is the current user. So we can store that over here, current user. Now, in this function, we can do anything we want with this object. We can log in on the console, that is context, or we can render the name of the current user. So current user dot name. Save the changes. Now let's go to our movie list component and add a movie row component. So here's the function that is the child of this consumer component. Inside this div, after displaying the name of the current user, I want to add a movie row component. Save the changes. So this is what we're returning. We have a div, some text, and the movie row component. Now back in the browser. So here's our movie row component. One immediate advantage that we have here is that we don't have a consumer component under the movie row component. In contrast, in our movie list component, because we use the consumer component, now we have an extra child here. And over time, this makes our hierarchy more convoluted. So if you use functional components, you're not going to see these consumer components in your component tree, okay? So here's our movie row component. You can clearly see the name of the current user. Also, we have the current user displayed in the console. Now let's compare these two implementations. Here's our movie list component. To use the context API here, we had to set this static property. Then we had to add this consumer component, which made our component tree a bit convoluted. And even worse, we had to use this function over here. This function is distracting us from seeing the actual content of this method. It's introducing some extra complexity. Now compare this approach with our functional component. All we had to do here was to call this hook, use context. So going forward, prefer functional components to class components.